Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. John back with the latest episode of the pandemic version of the Evolved Caveman. And today I am really psyched to have with me Brian Bogert, as in don't Bogart that joint, my friend. Brian Bogert is a human behavior and performance coach who teaches clients to leverage self-awareness and intentionality to become the most authentic version of themselves. That is who they already are. Brian helps executives, entrepreneurs, athletes, and growth-minded individuals learn this transformative approach that cultivates perspective, motivation, and direction to help them align their life with their true purpose and to defy their own expectations. He teaches not just to accept change, but to embrace pain in order to avoid suffering. And the reason I was excited to have him on is that he doesn't just teach this, he's lived it. So Brian learned the wisdom of resiliency through his own early experience with pain at the age of 7, which we're going to go into that story a little bit. And Brian has since then continued to develop mindful and actionable tools for growth in his personal and professional endeavors. And at one point in his auspicious career, he was a top earner as a sales professional at a publicly traded brokerage firm. That must have been fun. Brian has earned accolades as a top performer in the Southwest and was named one of 40 under 40 in the Phoenix Business Journal. Brian, how are you?
I'm fantastic, man. It's a great day whenever I can be with you.
Oh, yeah. And I got to say to people, we've had a few conversations, and every one of the conversations, I'm like, shit, I should have recorded that. That would have been great. Because they're always fascinating, right? I mean, like, it's just like intellectual ping pong.
It really is. I just try to keep up with you. So
well, thanks. I'm just trying to keep up with myself. That's hard enough some days. So let me... Tell me your story of hassle to happiness, because that really blew me away the first time we talked. The story of your arm getting, well, you tell it.
Yeah.
I don't want to steal your thunder.
Yeah. So everybody bear with me for 1 second. Just close your eyes for 1 second, unless you're driving, of course, and then keep them open. But I want you to imagine walking out of a store after a successful shopping trip, walking to your car, planning on going on with the rest of your day. And as you're walking to your car, you turn your head and see a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with zero time to react. Go ahead and open your eyes. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to the car, I always had an excitement and vigor for life. I was ready to get home and put that paintbrush to use. This was back in the days, though, when we didn't have key fobs, and I had to wait for my mom to catch up and stick her key in the door to unlock it. So I stood by the car waiting for her to catch up. She was only 3-4 feet behind me. As this happened, truck pulls up in front of the store, and driver and middle passenger get out. Passenger all the way to the right feels the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, John. He moves over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard. And before you know it, he's catapulting across the parking lot, 40 miles an hour right at us with no time to react. Now, we're parked in an end spot. So he went up and over the median, went up over the tree in the median, hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So there I am, laying in the parking lot on a 115-degree day in Phoenix, Arizona. My mom and brother watched the whole thing happen. My arm's now laying 10 feet away from me on the parking lot.
Ugh. So it was completely severed?
Completely off. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And my guardian angel happened to also see it all happen. There was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this took place, and she saw the literal life and limb scenario that was in front of her. So she rushed immediately into action. She focused on life first, which was to stop the bleeding at the wound, and limb second, which was to instruct some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, and have my arm on ice within minutes. Had she not done one or both of those things, I either wouldn't be here with you today, or I'd be here with you today with a cleaned up stump. That's just the reality of it, right?
Yeah.
Now, I know that many of the listeners weren't expecting it to go there today, right? I think what I've realized in all of my time doing this is that I have an extremely unique story. But what I've also realized is that we all have unique stories. What's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to help shorten our own curve to learning. So there's 2 primary lessons I'm going to share with you as we start this off, and then we can unpack and take it wherever we want. The first is I learned not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And the second you hit on in my introduction, which is, I'll unpack the specifics of it in a second, but really I spent 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old in a fog. I knew what was happening to me. I knew what was taking place, but I was also being guided and shepherded through the process by my parents, who were not in a fog. They were very aware of everything that was happening, and the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great suffering for them. So they literally willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, what was tough, to ultimately heal and strengthen me. And whether it was intentional or not, they ingrained in me a philosophy and a way of living, which was to embrace pain, to avoid suffering. And when done right, that's also when people gain freedom. And that's also when perspective, motivation, and direction start to come into play. So it's this concept that I've used to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I scaled our last business from $250,000 to over 15 million with the span of a decade. And now how I flipped that on its head as a human behavior and performance coach to help people become more aware, more intentional in who they already are, the things that you talked about. Because I genuinely believe that that's when joy, freedom, and fulfillment can exist in people's lives. And currently we're on a mission to impact 1 billion over the next 25 years.
There's so many ways I can go with that. So to back up a little bit to when you're 7 and you get rushed to the hospital, then remind me how many surgeries you had and how the hell did they repair and reattach an arm? I didn't even think that was possible.
Yeah, well, especially back then, right?
Yeah.
So I had, all in, I've had 24. There was 20 or 21 in the initial recovery over the first 5, 6 years after. I was 7. And when you backtrack all the way, I was really lucky to land with the right surgeon. There was only 3 surgeons in the entire state that even had any ability to contemplate a reconstruction like mine was. The first was traveling and out of town, so he couldn't take the surgery the first night, right? Because it had to start that night. The second had just worked a 12-hour day and said, there's no way I can take on this surgery. And the third had worked a 12-hour day, but he said, this is a 7-year-old boy. I got to give him a fighting chance. Now, he went into this thing with the understanding that this wasn't going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 surgery ordeal. He knew this was going to be 15, 20, 25. Wow. And so he went in literally in the very first surgery, and started recognizing nerves, veins, muscles, things within the arm that he needed to tag for future reference, because he knew that the body would not look the same as it really started to heal itself. And so he literally tagged all the nerve endings. He knew where they were. He knew how to get access to them. He knew where and how that we could reconstruct this. And so it was a systematic process over years. But the nerve surgery, for example, right? Nerves are kind of like a rope. If you imagine a rope and it's all these little fibers, nerves are the same way. So although you can flag it and know where it is and know that you can reattach it, think about cutting a rope in half. Could you ever perfectly align every fiber up to where the other one goes? No. Can you get darn close? Yeah. Right? And then it's a matter of helping the body reprogram and retrain itself based on the new connections that are formed when that's done. Well, this nerve surgery was a 19-hour nerve surgery. And the surgeon literally took one break to go to the bathroom and took a handful of M&Ms. And outside of that, he stood by the side of the table for 19 hours. Wow. With, basically a microscope on his face to be able to see nerve endings and pair this together. So I was really blessed because he was unbelievably talented and is still one of now the world-renowned experts in wound and reattachment. His name's Dr. Mark Gottlieb. He's based here in Phoenix. So I got really lucky from that standpoint.
Yeah, and one of the things that really hits me in the face with your story is it would have been really easy, and I think a lot of people would have dipped into depression and pessimism and could have flipped and turned the blame. I think our first instinct is to be the blame the driver. If only he hadn't have been blah, 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 doing whatever he was doing. And then how do you get from that first instinct to recovering your optimism?
Yeah. So perspective points is what's important. And I had that mindset. I mean, I literally remember waking up, feeling like I was in a fog, feeling like I was in a dream. And it took a few days before I realized, oh, this isn't a dream, this is reality. And then feeling sorry for myself kicked in. Why me? Why did this happen? Even at 7, like, I don't care how old you are. If you've got the ability to have executive reasoning and thought, these go through your head. At 7, I literally was like, why me? Right? Like, why? Why me? Why did this happen? What happened to the driver? I was angry at the driver.
Sure.
And I'm in the ICU. And we have families that are coming up to us who are saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. Oh my gosh, so horrific. We are so sorry. What can we do to help you guys? We'll do anything we can to help you. And then come to find out that their kid who's laying in the ICU bed next to me doesn't know if they're going to live for another month because of their terminal illness. And I get chills every time I tell that, because I spent so much time in the hospital system. I lost a number of kids and people that I got close to because they were suffering with something that their life was constantly in threat. Outside of the initial threat to my life, I might not have my arm again, but I was going to live. Right? I wasn't there because I was fighting for my life outside of the initial blood loss. After that was stabilized, though, it was only at that point, will I ever have an arm? Will I have function of my arm that's full and practical? Perspective is what knocked me out of that really early, because how do I lay in a bed next to a kid who doesn't know if they're going to live for a month and carry the victim mentality outside of the building after I'm leaving, walking on my own 2 feet, just because I don't know if I'm going to have an arm? Like that, it couldn't sit for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. It makes me think, there was a study on our happiness set point in psychology a few years ago, and it looked at, actually it was many years ago, but it looked at where your happiness set point is now, and then it tracked 2 groups of people. So one group won the lottery, and their happiness set point went up a couple points. Think of a 1 to 10 scale. If you're at a 5, it goes up to a 7 for about a year, and then it comes back down to where you were in the beginning. And on the other group was people that lost use of limbs due to a car accident or some sort of horrific accident. And, if you're at a 5, it goes down to about a 3 for about a year, and then it comes back up to where it was before the accident, which, we've concluded that we're very adaptable. And it's this idea of, the hedonic treadmill, that we adapt to anything good or bad, which is great in terms of the bad stuff, but not so great in terms of the good stuff, because we take it for granted after, like a new BMW or something, we just take for granted after a bit.
Right.
And then it doesn't add anything to our life satisfaction. And one of the things that really draws me to you is that energy and that enthusiasm, the optimism, because it's really infectious. And so, did you face any depression, or, you mentioned anger, but how long did that stay with you?
If I'm being honest with you now, I wasn't aware of it then. It lasted a lot longer than I would have told you in the time being. The reality of it is I created an external narrative to protect myself, because I was immediately the victim. And I was immediately being labeled based on what other people thought I was capable of through their own lens of how they viewed their capabilities. And I refused to be defined by those parameters. The other thing that I was dealing with was 2 other elements. Is one, nobody believed me, right? For a long time, because I was in a sling, and people would be like, oh, like what happened to your arm? And I'd tell them at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and they wouldn't believe me. They'd literally look to the adult I was with, often my mom or dad, to look for confirmation, and they'd be like, no, he's telling you the truth. Like,
yeah, well, it's hard to believe.
Saying with clarity and conviction, oh yeah, I was run over, my arm was ripped off, is just something people aren't used to seeing, right? So I got really used to seeing dropped jaws and like that startled look, and not there. And then the other thing is, kids can be mean, right? Anything that's different, fits outside of the box, ends up getting teased. So I built an external narrative that was, I'm strong, I'm good, I'm capable, I can do anything, and I don't need anybody's help. Served me for a long time. Really, what that was also covering and masking insecurity, covering and masking, fear of how I was going to show up in the world, covering and masking the anger that I had around not being able to actually do things normally and not fit the mold. And the older I got, the more I realized I don't really want to fit the mold anyway. Let's just throw the box out the window.
Yeah.
But truthfully, it's that narrative served me well, because it allowed me to hone my emotional intelligence, reading people so I could divert situations and places so it wouldn't put the attention on me. And then secondarily, mental toughness is a piece that I still believe very strongly in. It's only part of the equation now, and if we get there, you'll learn why I believe that. But when I was 20, I went down in a snowboarding accident. I re-broke my arm, compound fracture. I almost lost my arm again. That was one of the moments that I realized the power of our narratives, and that there was underlying emotion that was driving that narrative, right? Because when I'm now in my most vulnerable place ever as an adult, without my parents to help guide me through the process, because I'm not living at home, I'm living my own independent life, right? Nobody was there to help me. And oh, by the way, that's not because they didn't love me, because they didn't care, because they weren't there. I had so many people that had I asked, they would have shown up like that. But they bought into the narrative. Brian's strong, he's capable, he's good, he doesn't need our help, right?
He's self-reliant.
He's self-reliant. And I'd proven that to that point that I didn't need it, right? But I also didn't have the courage in that moment to actually ask for help. And so I was alone, and now navigating this process and reliving a lot of the experiences I did when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old as a 20 and 21-year-old, trying to figure out how do I move through the world? Because I went 10 months with my arm hanging by my side at that time of my life. Because I had 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me, who wouldn't repair me because of the medical malpractice risk that they might be.
Oh my gosh.
Because my anatomy was different. And that's another small world connection, because the guy who actually repaired my arm on the soft tissue side was Dr. Mark Gottlieb, who got connected with the orthopedic surgeon who actually was like, hey, if I do this, I'm going to contract with a plastic surgeon. Plastic surgeon he contracted with trained under Dr. Mark Gottlieb. When I started giving him the background, he's like, why would I do the surgery? This guy built your arm. So, right, full circle, it came back, and Gottlieb had another impact where he saved the trajectory of my life and the use of my arm.
Well, and let's go back. So thank you for sharing that. And let's go back to the pain versus suffering, because I think that's a really, really important idea for people to get, not just understand, but to take into their marrow, their DNA. And so I'm assuming you're going back to this kind of Buddhist idea of 2 darts. First dart's pain, second dart is suffering.
Sort of. I haven't actually ever described it that way, but I am familiar with
same thing, it sounds like.
Yeah. No. It's definitely in alignment with that. It's not a totally original idea. It's the way I viewed the world, right? And it aligns with other thought processes. So, I think it's interesting because we have to start with understanding what is pain and what is suffering. And when we define pain, it's literally short-term, intermittent, a direct cause from something, and healed once that direct cause is removed. Mm-hmm. What we do as human beings, as we do with everything, is we then further butcher it by putting clarifying words and adjectives in front of it, like acute and chronic. Acute maintains the definition, chronic changes it, because it implies that it's not short-term, that it isn't healed, and it persists long after that exists. But I think that when we keep it in the bucket of chronic pain, we call it that, okay? But suffering, it's not actually chronic pain, it's suffering. And suffering we don't want to admit, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. And we often grow numb to suffering because we adapt to it slowly because it creeps up on us, sometimes until the effects are irreversible. So to put this concept in practice, I'll give a few examples. We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of a loveless marriage that might end up in divorce, or frankly being stuck in a marriage if we want divorce. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation that we'll never get back. Right? And the list goes on. As a business owner, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth and losing all our other top talent because they were the greatest cancer in our culture. Right? I believe that we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I talk about with clients is that idea of first dart pain, second dart suffering, where the first dart is inevitable. And one of the things that I think is
inevitable and optional.
Great and tragic about your story is that you were completely undeserving of that accident. And there was no fair there. It's just kind of a random occurrence. So I think you mentioned that one of the thoughts that went through your head is why me, which is personalizing it, right? Why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? And so I think, that first dart of pain is bad shit happens to us in this lifetime, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, relational pain, spiritual pain, we're going to experience pain. And it's not personal necessarily. Right. Sometimes bad shit happens to good people. That one took a little bit for me to figure out when I was younger. And it can be random. And then the second dart is suffering. So you don't have any control over the first dart, but you do have some control over the second dart, which is how long are you going to stay stuck on this fact that the pain happened? How long do you stay stuck in anger, sadness, remorse, regret, guilt? And because you can keep suffering alive for years after the pain.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, if you even correlate it back to the beginning part of my injury and my accident, I could embrace the pain of the reality that was in front of me to avoid the suffering of being stuck and miserable because I was a victim, right? I mean, you can literally put that whole context. It's exactly what you said. Pain is, right, inevitable. Suffering is optional. And so that's a different way to layer it. You're right. It's a very similar concept. They apply differently. I think what's interesting is that's where I just really get people to encourage and embrace the pain, right? Not just to acknowledge it, accept it, and channel it, but like use it as a critical tool to our growth. Because when we have the ability to do that, I think it's actually that much more meaningful, because pain, right? Our avoidance to pain was an evolutionary response, right? The evolved caveman is a perfect example of this, right? We literally were conditioned to avoid pain to save our lives, right? To run away from conflict and challenge and difficulty and things that would put our life in jeopardy. Well, that's not our reality for most of us these days. And so the world has a narrative that we must avoid, reduce, or eliminate pain. I mean, think about all the prescription medications and like everything that's on to help us numb and reduce the pain. Well, pain is like perspective. It points us at what's important. And if we're listening and we look for the lessons that we can extract from our pain experiences, that's when it becomes critical to our growth. Because you said it best, nobody gets out of this world unscathed. Nobody.
No, and I actually put something out on social media recently that said, a life without pain is a life that's not worth living. And I think it's a pretty safe statement, because there's no life without pain. But I think it's partly about embracing the suck, embracing the pain. And I love that you have it in your bio, because one of the knocks against positive psychology, the scientific study of happiness and well-being, is that, it's happyology. That we just want to focus on happiness and we should be happy all the time and positive thoughts and affirmations. But that's not the whole story. It's a big part of happiness is allowing whatever's arising in the moment to arise without judgment. And if that's sadness, if that's anger, if that's grief or guilt, then go with that. And I think the more we can learn to turn towards that suffering in this case being sort of uncomfortable emotion, the quicker we get out of it, rather than, what I see so many men do is we fight it. I shouldn't feel sad. I can't feel sad, or I'm not supposed to feel fearful or anxious. That's just for pussies. Like that just makes it worse and prolongs it.
You're 100% correct. And I mean, again, transfer forward my idea a little bit. That external narrative was also me fitting the narrative of what the world was telling me to do, which is show up with a smile on, right? Like you can handle this. So that narrative to protect myself I didn't realize I was doing it in the time, right? It was just how I was being conditioned because of the world that we were in and the narrative, which is like, don't feel pain, be tough, show up, handle it, right? And so that's the narrative I created. So I shifted that whole next period of time to human connection, which was around vulnerability and authenticity. And I did a very good job trying to bring those elements into my world. Fast forward a little bit longer, because again, I think to your point, sometimes we suffer and we're aware why we're suffering. Sometimes we suffer and we're not aware why we're suffering. Okay? I had some other health stuff, which we won't unpack. I'm past it, I'm through it. But it rattled me a few years back to the point that it really caused my intellect and my energy to be rattled at a point when those are two things that I identify deeply with in my own personal view of self. And it also got to a point where my wife has joked for years that I'm not really emotional and I don't really feel things. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? I feel a lot, right? And then I'm in this situation a few years back with my daughter, and we're playing, and we're laughing, and we're loving on each other. And we lay down on the couch, and she's in front of me, and she rolls over, puts her arm around my neck, gives me a kiss on the cheek, and says, Daddy, I love you. And I broke down in tears. And I've always viewed men crying as actually like a signal of strength. It's just not how I've ever manifested my emotions. But what's interesting is when I started crying out of pure joy in that moment, it also made me realize, because I'd never cried out of pure joy that I knew of before that I probably wasn't experiencing pain, grief, guilt, fear, and all the things on the other side of the spectrum. Because if I haven't experienced it up at the top, right, I haven't experienced it at the bottom for sure. And it made me realize I was boxed in, right? I was literally boxed in. And I also started to unpack that when I shut off physical pain to protect myself because it was beyond my ability to cope, I also shut off emotional pain. And I never really brought that back in. And so it was only part of the equation that needed to be addressed, because just what you said, I have to literally now acknowledge and pay attention to what are the emotions that bubble up? What are the patterns that have been created by those? And how do I change those patterns so that I don't become stuck by the self-defeating patterns that those triggers and patterns create?
So, Brian, it makes me think of, there was a study a while back. Sorry, I keep going to studies. It's my Berkeley training. But it's fascinating in that you mentioned the emotional and the physical pain being closely married. And that's true at a anatomy level. They both occur in the insula, I believe. And there was a study on, I think it was Tylenol, acetaminophen, that they showed that when you take Tylenol, it actually blunts your empathy. So it's blunting physical pain, but it was also blunting emotions at the same time.
Yeah. Well, so they're showing that even with Botox. They're even showing that with Botox.
Well, yeah, you can't make the physical expressions,
right?
The emotional
expressions. Like the facial expressions, it changes the way we feel. It changes
you can't
our
be angry.
ability to connect with people. Exactly, right? And so they're all like connected. And that's, I think it was going back to your point where I didn't know the emotions that I was actually feeling. And as I started to feel more, I also started to realize, and this was the sad part, I not only was feeling more purely, but I started to become aware of how actively I was actually suppressing in the background without my knowledge that I was suppressing.
Yeah.
Right. I would have an emotion to bubble up where I just like felt the pure pain. And now I fight that. Whenever I feel the emotion, I try to just sit with it, because to sit with it allows me to get clarity on it, brings it into a level of conscious awareness, which then allows me to be intentional with it. And if it is having a negative impact in my life, by going through that process, I can understand where it's keeping me stuck versus where it's moving me forward. And without the ability to understand and experience that, again, you're missing a huge part of the human element and how we operate and interact with each other.
Yeah, and I would say one of the most important elements of the human experience, i.e. emotion, that it's, it's like your spidey sense. It's the guardrails on life. If we're talking about guilt, it's, it's a superhero that keeps you safe. If we're talking about fear, I've been thinking a lot about sadness and depression lately, and grieving, and trying to find the purpose or the reason for it, because all these have a reason. And I think that without sadness, we wouldn't take the time and space to stay home and reflect on difficult situations to figure out, how do I want to change? How do we want to learn from this? And I think that it would really, our learning would be severely restricted. But one of the things that I wanted to get to, because my mind goes all over the place when we're talking, I wanted to get to man box culture a little bit, because, I'm a geek about this stuff. And I also think that so much of what you're saying, it's interesting to me, because this accident seemed to have accelerated your breaking out of that man box. I mean, you talk about pain versus suffering, you talk about relationship hacks, or the importance of relationships, about connecting, about authenticity and vulnerability. That's not normal shit.
It's not. But what's interesting is I think we are hardwired, most people are hardwired to be intrigued and interested in those topics. It's just that most people don't talk about it on a normal basis. And so I think that, I broke down 3 different external things that happened to me. Both 2 were with my arm, 1 was a different health thing that both caused me to be broken to the core and had to rebuild and reflect on what that prior period in my life meant, and now how do I position that moving forward. So I think it did fast track me in a lot of ways to be able to get to the point where I realized I didn't want to be defined by other people or the world. And I think I realized that human connection is the most important thing. Again, I focused on human connection for almost a 13-year period between my second injury and my other deal. But what's interesting is human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. Mm-hmm. I mastered it from a strategic and tactical perspective, not from actually connecting, right? Yeah. And so I learned how to get other people to let their walls down. I learned how to open up just enough for vulnerability to be able to literally let them see. But I still used language that didn't focus on the emotional side. So I would coach with people. I'd talk with clients. I'd even talk with my wife. And my question used to be, what do you think about that?
Yep. Or the answer would be, I think I'm sad. Or I think I'm feeling the emotion, right? And so it's like, but that's still a thought. Where's the emotion? And then when I figured that out, I was like, oh shit, I got to go. I feel fill in the blank.
Correct. And then, but it also changes everything about interactions by just that simple shift in language. When you ask someone how they feel about something, most of the time, they have to pause and sit with that for a second.
Oh yeah.
When you ask them what
especially
they think,
for men,
most people respond like this, but you ask them how they feel, and it's like, huh. And then they always say, I've never thought about that.
Yeah. Stop thinking. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this brings up so much in the sense of, I think that we men are socialized to be thinkers. We get rewarded for that over many, many years, and we're disconnected from the emotional side, so much so that there's a study, and if anyone can get me the citation on this study, I would appreciate it. I lost it somewhere, but they looked at what the average man, how many emotions he can name versus the average woman, how many emotions she can name. And it was like 8 to 17.
Yeah, that's
which I found this out years ago, and I was like, okay, that kind of pisses me off. Like it tapped into my competitiveness, right? I'm like, I've got to learn more emotions.
Yeah.
Because I think we're not even aware of them when they hit us, except the really loud, angry ones, which is, mainly anger of some degree. But, how do you know if you're content? Are you aware when you're feeling awe?
Yeah. We don't focus on the mind-body connection enough in our culture, but in particular in the man culture. And so, that's why I say that was only part of the equation, because I used to think that mindset was everything, right? If you set your mind to it, if you're mentally tough, you can do anything. And by the way, that's a huge part of the equation. It really is. Okay. But it's part of the equation, because what I learned is the falsities of the narratives that our intellect can create for us, and our perceptions of what is real or not real can also be lied to in our own internal narrative, right? With the intellect alone. Those that really unleash, become unlimited, and can live with no limits in alignment are the ones that can connect the mind and the body. So it's heart set and mindset. It's literally, we need to be able to think about our thinking, think about our feeling, feel our thinking, and feel our feeling. Yep. It's literally that box. And if we can successfully do that, then we can understand and regulate between the emotional narrative and the intellectual narrative, which one is true and which one needs to lead in the scenario that we're in. Truthfully, like that's...
No. I'm sorry. I'm laughing because I think you're absolutely right in that 2x2 box, right? Thinking about feeling, thinking about thinking, feeling about thinking, feeling about feeling. It's metacognition and meta emotion. And I remember I came across this idea a few years ago, and I was all excited. I geeked out about it. And then I got a chance to do a little bit of work with Paul Ekman, who's the world's leading authority on emotion. Well, maybe next to Lisa Feldman Barrett, but put the two of them in a room, they'd have a good fist fight, because one thinks emotions are hardwired, the other one thinks they're socially constructed, but that's a whole nother story. So anyways, I told him that, and I was like, what do you think about this idea? And he looked at me and he's like, I don't know, what's the point? I was like, oh shit. I was totally disheartened.
Yeah, but you know what? I think that's also too, when you look at the extremist of like hardwired versus socialized, I think what you and I can probably recognize is it's probably somewhere in between. Yeah. Right. I at least that's my belief based on everything.
I agree. Yeah.
Because I do think that we are hardwired with a certain core set of emotions, right? And that's how they express as babies. But as we get older, right, that's where the conditioning comes in. What I think is fascinating about one of the things you said a second ago is shame is something that played a role in my life that I didn't realize. Right. And I think shame is the
join the club. We've got jackets.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm the president of the Phoenix chapter as we stand. But, it's the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing, because it can mask itself as other emotions and we don't even realize that it's there. But it's also shame that helps condition other emotions out. Think about it. Right. I'm on a mission as well to remove should from our language, because should is a shame-based language, or a shame-based word. Because what it implies is that whatever you're doing isn't good enough. Right. So think about all the narratives that we as men have heard. You shouldn't feel that. No, you shouldn't be crying right now. Oh, you shouldn't be sitting weak. Stand up, get going. You should you should puff your chest. You should feel really proud and strong. You should put a smile on, right? Like literally we are shamed into not feeling, which is so crazy because it's a feeling that's conditioning our not feeling. Yeah. But that's how we operate with it. So it's just so conflicting that it makes me laugh.
Well, the famous phrase, I think it's Albert Ellis, cognitive behavioral therapy, he says, stop shitting all over yourself.
Yes, stop shitting.
And it's a good way just to remember it, to kind of try to erase it as much as you can out of your mind. And the thing that I hate about shame, because I really don't think shame is useful for much at all. Guilt, sure. Shame just makes you feel I'm a bad person, and it makes you feel that you are unworthy of connection. Correct. So it disconnects us from other people, and that's messed up. Like, I think a big part of happiness is, as you said earlier, it's all about connection and relationships.
Right. That's right.
And, that was frustrating to me when I first figured that out, because I think I had bought into that idea that, kind of I'm an army of one, I'm an island, I'm a rock, kind of the Simon and Garfunkel song. And it doesn't work that way. Like, we need each other. We need people. We need relationship. And I think that vulnerability and authenticity, that sharing of your dark side or your mistakes or, kind of the worst shit that's happened to you in your life, that binds people to you.
Yeah, it 100% does. And, I think, right, to go back to what we just said, I actually feel and think both things here. I think you've experienced this before. I'm sure you have. I know that I have. You work with men through this really complex world of emotions and evolving ourselves into who we're meant to be and how we're wired to feel organically and how society layers that on top of us. I do as well. What I guarantee is that you experience something that I do, which is when you're working with men and you show vulnerability, you show emotion, you give them the trust and the permission to feel and express the same thing because of your actions and words. Yep. I am not sure that there are many men that turn away from that when they have another man who has a strong energy, who they have respect for, who they have trust with. Like, I've not seen many men turn away from that. In fact, most turn into it because they desire that at such a deep level. But as a whole, we aren't trained to do that as men. Yeah. So it's so foreign for most men that when they see it, which I'm sure they do with you, when you interact, even your friends, your non-clients, I guarantee you the other men in your life are like, ooh, interacting with John is different.
Yeah, right? I'm an alien.
And I am too. But what's interesting is men desire and seek that too at a different level, which is really fascinating to me, that we desire it, we seek it. But I think most men don't know that we desire and seek it, which is why we just stay in that box.
Well, one of the things that's fascinating to me is when I was a kid, I used to think I was the only guy that felt things deeply. Because, we've all got the mask on. We're all trying to hide it. We're all trying to act, apathetic, indifferent, cool. And as I got older and I started working with men, I was like, well, no, wait, you're that way too. Wait, you too. And in fact, I haven't really worked with that many men that aren't that way. And if you get in that box, if you're at the low end of that, then we might be talking about like narcissism or psychopathy or sociopathy, and that's a real problem. So I'd much rather have men who feel too much and teach them to kind of manage it and dial it back a little bit and be in touch with it than to try and teach someone how to feel more.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think even the ones that feel don't necessarily show that in the world, right? So when you give them a safe space, they just like melt.
Well, yeah, and they don't know that they're feeling. They think that, their emotions left them long ago, when in fact they left their emotions behind.
So I had a perfect example. I mean, I had a call earlier today with, I'm doing a hybrid coaching thing with this young man through a connection that I've gotten to meet. I say young man, he's in his 30s, so that's not even a fair assessment.
That just ages you, Brian.
Yeah, right. I know. But I think what's interesting about it is in 30 minutes, right? We were only 10 minutes into the call, and he was crying. And I don't say that to say that it was good, bad, indifferent. There was no judgment wrapped in it. What was interesting is that he has such a deep emotional pain that hasn't been brought to the surface. And it was just simply giving him a space around trust and asking the right questions. And I was fortunate that we got on the right path very quickly to help him in a short period of time. But there is this deep, dark passenger that he's been carrying with him for 16 years, right? Since a really traumatic thing happened in his life and he lost a loved one. But he hasn't ever dealt with it. But he clearly is feeling on such a deep level that he was triggered that quick to get into tears 16 years later. Right. Well, and so we were able to spend time in that space and just help him understand what that was he was experiencing.
Yeah, a great story. And it makes me think of this idea, because a lot of when you get into emotion, a lot of it's about metaphor. How do you think about emotion? What are the pictures in your mind? And there's a great one that comes out of the book Burnout. And it's this idea of emotions as tunnels. That, you got to go through the whole tunnel, which has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And once you get through the whole tunnel, to a large extent, you're free from that emotion connected with that experience. Yes. The problem is a lot of times we resist going into the tunnel at all, or we get into the tunnel and we get lost, like we turn around and go back the way we came, or it's dark in there and we're like scared shitless. And so we get stuck and paralyzed in the tunnel. And I think what you did is you kind of were holding the lantern
I held the light
to
and
get
I was
all
like,
the way
dude,
through
you got to come this way.
the tunnel.
That's exact. By the way, I didn't use that exact analogy, but that's exactly what we talked about. It's like, look, you haven't ever progressed from that moment forward. You've been stuck. You're circling. You continue to loop around. But like until you move through this and feel it and unpack what's necessary to unpack, like it's going to impact every other part of your life. And so here's the light that you need to run towards. And if you run towards this, trust me when I tell you, you will be free, but it's going to hurt more before it feels better. Just trust me on this, and we'll unpack it over time to get there. But that's the thing.
And I think it's the only way to go
towards the light.
It's the only way to do it. Like you have to go through the tunnel. So you have to experience the emotion, and then you can get out of it and get past it.
100% agree.
So I want to change topics a little bit because there's this another piece I wanted to talk about, the idea of destination versus the journey. And, to me, it makes me think of that, what I call the bullshit story that we're all force-fed as pudgy-faced little rugrats, ankle biters. You get good grades, go to a good college, get a good job, make money, get married, have kids, get promoted, make more money, retire, and then you'll be happy. Yeah. So the eye is always on the prize or always on the destination. And, boy, when I just get that next promotion or when I retire, then I can relax. Then I won't be such a dick. Then I won't be so angry. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So what's interesting, you led with the destination versus the journey, and I can weave that in for sure. But what comes to mind with the examples you gave is this who, not what philosophy. Right. I think so many of us start out like as the most authentic burning light of who we are. Right. And then the world gives us all these messages, just like what you talked about. And so we end up chasing the what house, what car, what amount of money, what spouse, right? What's next? Right. If I just get here, I'll be happy. And what inevitably happens in that process is that when people chase the what without a very clear understanding of the who, or if the who, then the who gets lost. And it literally starts to just dismantle to a point where now all of a sudden they might have the house, the money, the success, all of the things that they've sought after. They've accomplished the what. But then they wake up one day and they realize they're miserable because they have no idea who they are. Right. Yeah. And what does that mean for where do they go next? And so that's a lot of the work that I do is help restore the sense of self back to people, because when we can recalibrate to the who, and we do that with absolute conviction, clarity, and we take people through that tunnel that you just described to help them go through that process with absolute understanding of who they are, then the what becomes a manifestation of the who, and it's less effort. Right. They move faster with less effort. And so to me, that the correlation you gave is really that who, not what piece, but the destination versus the journey is also really important, because we have to enjoy the journey on our path, right? I've been in that phase of life at times where like it's all about getting to the top of the mountain and not paying attention to anything along the way. And I've missed a whole lot. I've missed meaningful experiences. I've missed different lenses and perspectives to view things. I've missed memories. I've missed, really cool pieces of scenery that are along the way that I might not have even noticed were there because I was so tunnel visioned and head focused on what? Well, I peaked that mountain, but guess what has to happen before I can go climb another one? I got to go back down. Yeah. Right? And so I have to really pay attention to every minute being where my feet are and honoring who I am and the things that are in alignment, because then the what, like I said, it just becomes a much more powerful manifestation of who I am.
Well, and part of that to me, I think of, past, present, future, and of training the mind to spend more time in the present, because it makes me think of a very successful young entrepreneur I had several years ago. And I was showing him this grid of, positive past, positive present, positive future, negative past, negative present, negative future. And where do you spend most of your time mentally? And he was like, most of my time's in a positive future. I'm like, wow, that's great. Like, I haven't heard that before. That's awesome. Must be very nice. And he had gained a lot of reward as a result. And then my next question was, so how does your wife like that? And he was like, it's funny you say that, because it used to piss his wife off because he was never there when he was there. Yeah. And so I think, you know what I'm saying? Like, he wasn't present when he was there with his wife. And so I think that, I believe in my heart of hearts that one of the big skills in order to live a happier life is to train the mind to spend more time being present so that you can enjoy it, so that you can tap your senses and look at a beautiful sunset or feel the wind. And it really makes me think of a lot of the shit we knew, to your point earlier. I knew this stuff when I was 5. or 4 or 3.
And the world screwed us up.
Yeah. And I've just forgot it, or it's been socialized out of me. And so I had to rediscover that in order to be happier.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that's something I struggle with, right? It's something I put a lot of attention and time and energy into, which is to be where my feet are. And I say it that way. That was a trick I learned from one of my first coaches. It's a simple self-regulating technique. Look down, see where your feet are. Is my body, my energy, my mind, my spirituality here right now in this moment? If you can check those boxes, then you can be in the present and be with the people that are around you and experience it in those moments. But, it's a challenge for some people. Why I laughed and what was interesting is the presenteeism is definitely a big piece of it. I'll say in my house, it's interesting because I typically live in the present future in a lot of the ways that I operate. My wife lives in a negative in a lot of ways that she operates.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that negatively. It's just that's how her world has conditioned her to view, is to look for what are the things that could go wrong, which also makes us a really interesting pair. But it also, for the person that's on the negative side, sometimes it's gosh, why are you so positive all the time? It's well, because
it gets annoying.
I see the light in what we're doing. And, she truthfully, her lens also helps temper some of my stuff into reality, which is great. But the presenteeism is something that I struggle with because I'm thinking that way. I'm thinking about future. I'm thinking about impact. It's really hard. And that's where I talk to a lot of people about creating transitional type routines sometimes where you need to give yourself the ability to pivot between roles, particularly for high performing future focused.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Individuals to come into the house. If you haven't given yourself the ability to ratchet some of that stuff down, you're going to come in guns blazing on the phone, come in 30 minutes at home before they even realize you're already done all these things. Mentality and your physicality and your spirituality won't be there. And so it's even in COVID sometimes because people's environments are blended. So there's not that transition. Our workspace is our home space for most people. So for me, that's every night when I'm done, I literally have to give myself a few minutes just to breathe and put down what I've been carrying with me all day so that I can put 100% of myself into my wife and my kids for that 90 minutes I have with them each weeknight, right? Because if I don't do that, that's a missed opportunity. And
right.
I'm not perfect. I screw that up still, but I at least am trying to be aware and intentional with each step. And that's what I hope people take from this as well is what transitionary techniques are you using today to switch between your roles so that you can be present and where you are in anything that you're doing?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the point about transitional routines or rituals. One of the things I used to talk about pre-COVID with, my kind of high performers is, on your way home from work, just stop at a park or a creek or a lake and just look at it for, 3 minutes, give or take. And just focus on breathing, focus on letting go of the stress and the shit from the day. Imagine taking off your work hat and putting on, some dorky dad hat so that you can go into your household and be there while you're there so that you can be with your kids. Because I know a lot of high-powered executives that will sit down with a 4-year-old or 5-year-old child and they're on their phone or they're thinking about all the stuff that happened during the day. And, young kids won't tolerate that. If they're smart, they'll grab your nose and they'll say, no, daddy, here, look at me.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they should do. And they're great trainers for spending time in the present moment. Like a 2-year-old, there's nobody better.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. And that's one of the things I've benefited from having children. They have forced me to be in the now more so than ever. And it also forces me because I care so deeply about being a good dad and leading them and leading by example. Right. I also, one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got from someone who was a father was he's like, if you think about your kids in terms of how many summers you have left with them, you start to realize how little time you have. Right. So my son is almost 7. I have 11 summers left with him. I get chills when I say that. That's not a lot. Of time.
No, it's not. It goes really fast.
My 90 minutes each night, my times on the weekends, it goes by fast. And so, and there's also seasons to each element of their development and growth. And so I try to be really, really in tune to when they ask me to do something. Hey, daddy, will you play catch with me? Hey, daddy, will you play this video game with me? Hey, daddy, will you play a game with me? Hey, daddy, will you read with me? And again, I'm far from perfect. And there's many moments that those have slipped right through. But I try to capitalize on as many as I can because at some point, if you don't do it, they're going to stop asking. And at some point, they're just going to stop asking because they're too old for it. And so I look at that and I say, I can't recreate this time. I can always create more money, more businesses, more impact, more I only have this amount of time with my family.
Well, and if you think about, 11 summers, when kids get to be I don't know, fill in the blank, 13, 14, 15, you become far less cool and far less important, and their friends gain a whole bunch of importance. Yeah. And so at a certain point, they don't want to hang out with us just because we're dorky or, we're not cool or whatever it is. And so you're right. They won't ask us to engage at that point. So the time is really limited. I remember when my kids were young, I remember I was writing a book and I would get annoyed when they would interrupt me. And then I thought, whoa, wait a second. Like, I'm coming at this from the completely wrong perspective. If I value being a father, if I value my family, I got to put them above my work. And so I work to become.
Easier said than done.
It's difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult. It's a challenge. But I really appreciate the hell out of you saying, I'm trying to be the best dad I can be. I think that's it's a value I greatly respect.
Thank you.
So let me ask you this. We got to wrap up. I've greatly enjoyed this conversation, as I knew I would. Where can people get a hold of you if they would like more information about you or how to work with you?
Yeah, so my website's the best place. It's brianbogert.com. A whole lot of free content is on there, and there's ways to engage us for speaking, for our courses, for our one-to-one coaching, and all of our social handles are on there as well. So I'm at Bogert Brian on pretty much all social. I said earlier that we're on a mission to impact 1 billion people. And so the reality of it is I know that 99.99999% will never pay us $1. So through that lens, I also have a free resource if people want to take it up. Go to nolimitsprelude.com. It's a succinct version of a lot of our coaching philosophies, which just lead you on an intrinsic journey to ask the right questions so you can recalibrate to the who and start being able to embrace the pain, avoid the suffering in your life, and live with really no limits and alignment. So feel free to take it up on that, but just go to the website. That's probably the best place in general.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for the interview. Thank you for your friendship. I really enjoy this relationship.
Yeah, I do as well. And thank you for creating a platform that you're putting so much good into the world, and the theme that you're focusing on and impacting men's lives. There's a trickle effect for everything. So thank you for being who you are and building this, because otherwise I wouldn't have the opportunity to be with you, brother.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right. And that's it for this interview and this episode of the pandemic version of the Evolved Caveman. And if you've liked these episodes, please remember to go rate and review on Apple. Thanks so much. That's it. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.